Hey guys, we're going to continue with bony fish today, and we're looking at different types of fins. And you have a picture in your notes showing that we have rounded, truncate, forked, and lunate. These are various types of fins, and you'll notice that all four of these, they are symmetrical, meaning that they have the same shape on the top of the fin as they do on the bottom of the fin. There's also the last one, which is found in a shark that we saw in our dissection. This is a heterocircle type of caudal fin, and it is asymmetrical. So again, taking a look at the first four, they're all symmetrical, found in bony fish. We have rounded, we have truncated. Truncated means that it's been shortened. You have forked, and then lunate is more like a moon, the root word of lunate being moon, loon. Continuing on, we did a lab last week on the aspect ratio, and we have this paradox. Larger fins produce larger thrust and increased speed, but larger fins mean that you have more surface area that's going to be contacting the water. So the larger the surface area, the increased drag and the decreased speed that you're going to have. So is it better to have a larger surface area, or is it better to have a smaller surface area? Well, it's better to have a smaller surface area, but we still need that large fin to generate all that thrust. So the ideal caudal fin, we want to have large thrust with a small surface area. So fins with larger height are going to give you a larger thrust. That's going to be a stronger fish, like tuna, for example. And fins with less surface area, this will give you less drag, meaning that you're going to have less fin contacting the water, so there's going to be less friction. So as we saw in the lab, this is described as the aspect ratio. So high aspect ratios, here's the formula. When you have a large caudal fin, or the large height over low surface area. So the larger your height, if you look at the formula, you're going to be increasing your aspect ratio. Also, if you decrease your surface area is found within the denominator, and that's going to equate to a larger aspect ratio as well. So higher aspect ratios equate to higher speeds. So tuna will swim faster than yellowtail, which will swim faster than a bass, which will swim faster than a sculpin. So that is the aspect ratio. Now, cost of transport. This is going to be a comparison of walking versus flying versus swimming. What's the benefit of each in terms of energy? So we're going to compare running, flying, and swimming. So running contacts a solid surface. So when we run, our feet are in constant contact with the ground. This is going to create a high amount of friction, which means that it's going to take us a lot of energy to move. Flying contacts the air. This is a lower friction than running. However, it requires a high energy cost to remain in flight. So you have less friction because air is less viscous than water. But to maintain flight continuously, that takes a lot of energy as well. So let's take a look at swimming. Swimming contacts the water, so it's going to be a higher friction than air, but there's going to be lower energy cost since the body is being supported by water. So it takes the least energy to swim. So we have low energy costs since the body is supported by water. So if we combine all these, the cost of transport, running is going to be more energy requiring than flying. Flying takes less energy than running, but swimming takes the least energy. And the significance of all of this is that more energy can go into growth and reproduction rather than movement. So fish can grow and they can reproduce very, very fast because they don't have to spend a high amount of energy on their motion, or their cost of transport is going to be low. So hydrodynamics. We talked about aerodynamics a little bit. Hydrodynamics is the fluidity in which an object moves through the water. So a ball would move through the water fairly well because the water would go around that ball. But if the ball has these projections along the sides, then that's going to create more friction, more surface area, more drag. It's going to slow it down. So to be streamlined is good in the water. Streamlined means you have an efficient shape with minimal resistance. The most ideal shape is going to be a drop turned on its side. So imagine a raindrop falling. I think we discussed this in the past as well. It's going to be curved on the bottom and pointy on the top, your classic raindrop that you might draw. So now turn this raindrop and turn it on its side so that the curve is facing forward and you have the basic body plan of a fish. So three things are going to be affecting the streamlining. The first is what's called frictional drag. This is the total surface area. This is related to the caudal fin, but it's just the total surface area of the fish. A large surface area will increase the frictional drag. You also have what's called form drag, and this is the frontal surface area. What is the front of a fish going to be looking like? If it's flat, it's going to be contacting a lot of the water. If it's more pointy, then that water will split around that sharp edge. So it's going to be pointy towards the front and then curved as it travels on the top of the fish and the bottom of the fish. So take a look at your optimal shape with the fish. The fish does not have a flat front, but it's kind of pointy. It's then curved as it goes around the fish. The last is going to be turbulence. This is going to be made by projections. So the more projections that you have, the more turbulence that's going to be created in the water. Again, turbulence is going to be stirring up the water. Very similar to turbulence that you might have on land from an airplane landing, and you see these swirls of wind or condensation. And the turbulence is what's going to be slowing a fish down. So the optimal shape is going to be a smooth front with a tapered rear and few projections. So a smooth front, a tapered rear, and few projections. So the tuna has a pretty good shape. If you turn the tuna so that the mouth is facing down, it'll be shaped like a teardrop. It does have some projections on the anterior and the ventral side. I'm sorry, the dorsal side and the ventral side. You can see behind the dorsal fin are these small little projections, these small little fin or finlets. Those are also found on the ventral side as well. So a swim bladder. We did dissection on our fish last week, and we found that the swim bladder was of a different type than we see in this picture. There are two types of swim bladders. So fish are denser than water and they tend to sink. So these bladders are going to be providing buoyancy in order to conserve energy. So if you remember the shark doesn't have a swim bladder, but it does have an oily liver to help with its buoyancy. So fish don't have these oily livers. They have some type of swim bladder, or they could actually have, it's either going to be an air bladder or it's going to be an oil bladder. So we'll take a look at all these different ones. So we're going to start off with the gas-filled swim bladder. And the first one is a physostomus. Okay, stoma, you might remember stoma from biology. These are the little mouths that are found on the bottom sides of leaves. And it helps with gas exchange. Stoma means mouth. Okay, physo means bladder. So the translation of this means bladder mouth. And their air bladders are connected to their mouths through a channel that connects to their esophagus. So air bladder characteristics, it contains what's called a pneumatic duct. I'll have to draw this for you, and you'll have to incorporate this into your lecture notes later. But imagine the fish with the esophagus going straight back towards the stomach. Now imagine a branch that branches off of this and then is going to be leading into the air bladder. So the air bladder will connect to the esophagus with this pneumatic duct. Again, I'll post another video online so you can incorporate this into your lecture notes. There's also a physoklistos. Okay, physo means bladder, klistos means closed. So what we had in our dissection with the tilapia, that was a physoklistos bladder, meaning that the bladder does not connect to the esophagus, meaning that it does not have a pneumatic duct. It's completely independent. So the air bladder characteristics, it lacks a pneumatic duct. So again, we'll have to have these drawings in a different video. But both fish start out as larvae with a pneumatic duct, but the physoklistos, the ones with the bladder closed, they lose theirs as they grow into adults. Even half of the fish species lose their bladders entirely. So not every fish is guaranteed to have a swim bladder. So here's the problem. When you're descending into the ocean, the pressure is going to increase. This is going to contract your bladder. So what's going to happen is that your volume of your air bladder is going to decrease, which means that your bladder is not going to be as effective. We want a large air bladder to provide buoyancy, so we're decreasing our buoyancy. That's going to make the fish sink. Again, very similar thing happened to me while scuba diving. I was at about 100 feet, and our group was descending pretty rapidly because we were being squeezed and the size of our lungs were decreasing and our body was being squeezed, and so our volume was getting smaller. So since our volume was decreasing, our density was going to be increasing, so we started sinking very, very fast. So the same thing happens with a fish. So pressure increases, this contracts the bladder, and the volume is going to decrease. So there's got to be a solution for this, and there is. So the fish they have to increase the amount of gas to compensate for the increased pressures. So we want to maintain the same bladder size. So we want to inflate the swim bladder with more air as you descend. So how do we get air in? Well, physiostomas, those that have the bladder mouths, they can gulp air into their bladders, but they have to be at the surface in order to do that. So if they're at these deep depths, they can also pull oxygen from their blood. There's this little organ called a gas gland, and that connects to their swim bladder. And they can pull the oxygen from the blood in order to inflate their swim bladder when the pressure is increasing and the volume of their swim bladder is decreasing. So what does this sort of sound like? It sort of sounds like our lungs, because our lungs can pull oxygen from the air and pump it into the blood, and we can also give off the carbon dioxide into our lungs and then breathe that out. So in physiostomus fish, they can gulp air at the surface, or they can also pull oxygen from the blood. So if it's a physiostomus, the gulped air will go into their esophagus, it will connect to the pneumatic duct, and that will then connect to the air bladder. Physoclesis, though, they don't have a pneumatic duct, so they can't gulp any air at the surface, but they can do the same thing at depths as a physiostomus. They can pull oxygen from the blood, again, using the gas gland. So as the volume of their air bladder is decreasing because of the pressure, they can reinflate that, okay, by pulling the oxygen from their blood. Well, let's take a look at the other scenario. When ascending, your pressure is going to decrease, so the bladder is going to start to expand, like the picture we saw in chapter 3. What looked like the fish's tongue was the swim bladder. So the bladder is expanding, and it might bring us to the surface too quickly. So as you ascend, the pressure decreases, so the bladder is going to expand, the volume is going to increase. Decreased pressure, increased volume. So each fish has a solution. The physiostomus, okay, this is the bladder mouth, they have the pneumatic duct, which connects their air bladder to their mouth. So they can actually burp, they can even fart out excess oxygen, and they can also push it back into their blood through the gas gland. Okay, so the burp immediately goes out through their pneumatic duct, the esophagus, back out into the ocean, but sometimes some of that can find its way down through the esophagus into the stomach. That's going to take a longer time, but they can also push it back into the blood through their gas gland. So the physoclesis, the bladder closed, again, they don't have the pneumatic duct, they can't burp, they can't fart out air bubbles. They have to push the air back into the blood the way that came in, which was through the gas gland. So we also have another type of bladder, and it's a fat-filled swim bladder. So as depth increases, pressure continues to increase and would shrink air bladders to a very, very small size. So deep fish have a fat-filled bladder which resists expansion and contraction. So they have fat-filled bladders. This is going to be can also be oil, but it's filled with not air. Air has the ability to expand and contract because it has lots of space. But if you have fat or oil, then it's not going to contract very much at all. So if you're a vertical migrators also tend to have fat bladders. They don't have to deal with the volume changes as they go up and down through the water column. Those that live near the surface and don't do a lot of migration, those are the ones that are going to have the air bladders. Okay, absorbing oxygen at the gills. So think of the air that we breathe. Okay, the oxygen in the air is 20%. This means that it's 20 parts per 100. And percent means parts per 100. Okay, look at the oxygen that's in the water. Okay, and when I say this, this is, of course, water is H2O, but we're not talking about the O in the water. We're actually talking about the O2 that's between all the water particles. So you have all your water particles in the ocean. We're talking about how much O2 from the atmosphere that was made by plants, or it could be from the water that was made by plankton or seaweeds. How much O2 is in there? It's actually 6 parts per million. Okay, I did the mathematics of this, and it comes out to be about 35,000 times less than air. Okay, so the result of this is it's more difficult to absorb oxygen from water. So fish need to be efficient at absorbing oxygen at their gills. Fish need to be efficient at absorbing the oxygen. So their hemoglobin, just like us, is an iron protein in red blood cells that absorbs oxygen. So they have red blood cells as we have red blood cells. What makes them red is the hemoglobin, and the hemo is actually iron. So the iron, when it binds to oxygen, it forms like an iron oxide, and iron oxide is actually red. That's why blood is red. It's because of all the iron that's in it, which is found in the hemoglobin. We can also see the blood running through the gills. We saw this in our dissection. This causes the gills to be a red coloration. Here's a good picture showing the gill arches and also those gill filaments, which are red. This, of course, has the operculum that's been removed. Here's a good picture of the gill filaments and the gill arches. You can see those gill rakers as well on the arches. This would be a good example of a fish that has a plankton diet that would not be a predator. And to be efficient, it's going to be using what's called a counter current system. And I'm going to have to draw this. And we're going to be drawing a counter current system and also a non-counter current system that's actually, it's not found in fish, but it's nice to compare to the counter current system that exists within the blood vessels within the gills. So we'll go over that in another video as well. So the result of a countercurrent system, as we'll see in the next video, fish can pull more oxygen into the blood using a counter current exchange system. Okay, taking a look at their circulatory system. Very much like us, they have a heart. The heart is not very well developed. You may have learned this in biology. They have a 2-chambered heart. Frogs have a 3-chambered heart. We have 4-chambered hearts, but they only have a 2-chambered heart. Their gills, of course, are red because they're going to be absorbing the oxygen from the water, and their arteries are going to be carrying the oxygen to the body. And their veins are going to carry the deoxygenated blood back to the heart. So because of this two-chambered heart, it really is not efficient as ours is efficient. So you're following the pathway from the heart is taking the blood and it's pumping it to the gills, where you can see it turns red, meaning that it's going to be deoxygenated. That then goes through arteries to deliver all the blood to all the tissues of the fish, and it then is deoxygenated and is then going to come back to the heart. The problem is with the two-chamber heart is that you might have some mixing of your blood between the two chambers. It's not as efficient as our hearts with the 4 chambers, because one side of our heart is devoted to oxygenating the blood, and the other half of the heart is devoted to pumping the oxygenated blood to the body after it comes back from the lungs. So I think we'll stop there, and if you can go to the other videos regarding the air bladder characteristics, and then also the counter current system found in the gills.